When it comes to classic British motorcycles, it seems like a lot of people are hiding them. And today I just want to talk a little bit about a couple of secrets you might not know about some of these bikes. Today in front of me is my 1962 BSA Gold Star. This is a single 500. This was the race model of the time. I've made a couple videos on this motorcycle in the past, but getting right into this video, the first thing I want to talk about is how these motorcycles ride. If you don't know anything about British bikes, you might find this very surprising, and the thing that I think most people find surprising about these bikes is the fact that they're all right-hand shift before 1975. In 1975, a lot of updates happened because of the Japanese, and they stopped making them right-hand shift. But as you can see right there, the shifter is on the right-hand side. In order to go into gear, you go one up, and then you got 3 or 4 down depending on the motorcycle. So these would be considered to be a GP shift on a standard left-hand side transmission. But the problem with British motorcycles is Triumph. When it comes down to Triumph, they did something weird. So unlike BSA, Norton, Ariel, AJS, Matchless, whoever it was, Triumph decided, you know what, instead of doing a GP shift pattern, let's do what would now be considered a standard shift pattern. So when you hop onto a Triumph motorcycle of the time, their shift will be one down and the rest up. Kind of weird, a weird fact if you didn't know that. It always surprises people when I tell them, yeah, the shifter is on the other side, and they go, what? No way, oh my god. Another really weird thing about how these motorcycles ride is the fact that they ride very stiff and very rigid. All the British bikes I've ever gotten feel like one just concise unit of a motorcycle. That's the best way I have to describe it. Now this bike in particular does have suspension in the front and the rear. Some of the bikes were rigid at the time, and they also had plunger suspension. They had gutter forks on some of the models. This is a later iteration of a British bike. This still has the separate unit. This is a pre-unit construction with the engine and the gearbox separated from each other. Most of the British bikes and most of the people, when they're looking for British bikes, they're looking for those pre-unit bikes, and that's really what separates some of the later bikes from these earlier bikes here. But this does have the proper suspension that the later bikes would have. But when it comes down to these bikes, they feel just very stiff, very rigid, very one piece, very solid metal. And that's something else that you might find if you run into one of these bikes. You're gonna run into them and you're gonna get hurt because the metals they used on these things are very, very hard. I don't know what it is about the British steel or iron or aluminum at the time, but all of it feels very robust. When you run into a Japanese bike, it's like, ooh, my bad. When you run into a British bike, you're like, oh god. Yeah, it's not a fun time. These things hurt. Now you might want to consider some of those things before you do buy a British bike of any kind, but a couple of other key things that you might not know about these bikes, and going into some more statistics, I'm sure if you have the itch to buy a British bike, you're going to know some of those things. But if you are just getting into this, some valuable information if you are buying one of the bikes is the fact that these bikes are mostly 6 volt. So if you are getting a bike that hasn't run, or if you're trying to do servicing on the bike, they're 6 volt and they're positive ground. So you might want to get a service manual or an online service manual, look through the stuff, because they have weird kind of quirky things to them. These bikes have magnetos instead of kind of standard timing systems on them as well. Some of these motorcycles will have a manual advance on the timing, like this Gold Star. Most of the bikes in the 50s started to go away from the manual. The Gold Star kept it because it was race bike in my belief, so that's why the Gold Star has it, which I think is pretty cool. But my 1954 Ariel Square 4 has auto. My 1951 and 53 Golden Flashes both are automatic timing, so that's something to consider. Now, getting into another big factor and a thing you should know before buying them is parts availability and serviceability, reliability, and those kind of things. As far as parts go, when you're buying a bike like a Triumph Bonneville or a BSA Gold Star or a Golden Flash, something that exists out there, something that people are going to want to buy parts for, motorcycles people own, I suppose. You know, there's very obscure models like Silverhawk Matchlesses and things like that where there's not a lot of them out there, so parts might be a little harder to find. But even with those bikes, they're out there. When it comes to a bike like this that is produced, people are looking for parts, and you know, people own them and they want to service them. There was a time I would consider a gray period in the early 2000s where parts availability, the internet didn't really exist too much. These motorcycles had stopped being produced, so you really couldn't find too many of the parts, and I think a lot of people got the idea that you can't service these bikes anymore, but that's not true. Now in 2025, you can get the parts for the bikes, you can find all the information on what to do, to how to service them, the service intervals, maintenance things, how to take them apart, weird issues you might be having. So any of those kind of concerns you might have, you can find a majority, if not all, the parts for most of the British bikes that are out there. Again, if you have very, very obscure models where they only made 100 or 50 of them, parts are obviously going to be harder to get. But even if you are looking for some of those rarer bikes, if you're looking for service parts and being able to restore them, you know, things like gauges and all those things, even on the regular bikes, are going to be very expensive from the 50s and 60s. Like these gauges here are each very expensive, and you can buy fake ones, but real parts are expensive. When we're talking about service items, you still should be able to cross shop, because a lot of the British companies use many same parts throughout different models and different manufacturers. So that's a good thing to know, that you can make things work and you can use parts from other bikes that should fit onto your bikes. These things are serviceable and you can find parts for them. In all my experiences, I've been able to find almost every single thing that I've looked for. Now, when it comes down to reliability, I think the service and the parts unavailability gave these things a bad reputation for themselves. Now, these motorcycles will leak oil. They are designed from the factory, for most part, to spit oil out of their primary. Not only that, but things like seals and gaskets do deteriorate over time. So yeah, you're gonna have to rebuild some engines in some cases, get some new gaskets in them. You might have to just deal with a little bit of oil drippage on some bikes. Like Gold Star is dripping a little bit of oil, as you guys have seen in past videos. I need to get into the lower filter there and replace the gasket most likely and do an oil change. So it's not really the biggest deal in the world. It was leaking profusely out of the barrel and we had to reseal all of that, but that was just because the scenario and the things that we were going on and dealing with this motorcycle. Now, there are some service items that will be neglected on a majority of British bikes you buy. When I bought this motorcycle, I had to do a top end on it, put a new piston and a new sleeve in it, because the previous owner decided that he would bore it out instead of properly just fitting new parts into it. Another thing I need to do is I will most likely need to go and tear apart into this drum. I might need to replace some of the shoes in it because it's not really operating as I believe it should. I'm aware drum brakes, if you don't know, are not going to be as good as disc brakes, and you got to change your mindset when you ride them, but my bike needs adjustments in my opinion. But you do want to watch out for things like tires, your brakes, the inside of the gas tank, just basic services and things that any motorcycle should need. Now, I'll link below a video that's specific about looking for those things and just making sure the bike is in operational shape. I'll leave that video below. This video is more so of the specific things about British bike ownership that you might want to consider. Now, talking about the actual reliability riding these motorcycles, well, I've had a pretty on and off experience with these bikes. As soon as I bought this Gold Star, my bike had problems. I've addressed them and I've put on a couple hundred good miles with this bike. It's not giving me any hiccups, and knock on wood, it's going to continue to let me just have a good ownership and just being able to service it. My motorcycles like my Triumph was not running for several years, 7-8 years off the road, and I kicked the bike, and that bike has given me nothing but a phenomenal experience. Unfortunately, a motorcycle like my Ariel Square 4, I rode the bike probably 50 to 70 miles and it blew a head gasket. A Square 4 head gasket is quite advanced, so it wasn't a simple just on and off job. But that motorcycle had been sitting for 30 years, so the engine gasket was 30 years old and it was the incorrect engine gasket. For the most part, when you're buying a single or a twin, Ariel Square 4 of course is one of those crazy weird bikes, but again, I can find parts for that bike if I really wanted to. They did make quite a few of them, and there's a lot of enthusiasts out there for those bikes. But when you're buying a single or a twin, which is primarily what you're going to get when you're buying a British bike, they're pretty reliable. When it comes to modern day oils, modern day filters, and things that you can do to prolong the life, it is recommended around 15,000 miles to do a full bottom end rebuild of some of those twins with the sludge traps. The sludge trap is like an internal oil filter that you need to take the whole case apart for. But you can prolong that by almost double its life, if not significantly more than that, by using an external oil filter. Those modern day advancements and tweaking the bikes just a little bit allow the motors to live a lot longer. Modern day just things allow these motorcycles to be functional. I think if you buy a good bike and you're willing to learn a little bit about the quirks of British bikes, like the positive ground, like the 6-volt systems, and be willing to troubleshoot them a little bit, because you will have problems from time to time, and I won't say that you don't, but small things might arise. I genuinely think that it's not something you want to depend on. I don't think I would depend on this Gold Star. Again, this is a race bike from the time. Most likely, you're watching this video looking for a fun motorcycle to bring back some memories perhaps, or you just want to own a piece of history, because honestly, this motorcycle, the Square 4, they're pieces of history at this point, and I see them as art that you can ride. And it's a shame to not ride them in my opinion, but we'll talk about that, and we've touched on that many different times. Don't hide them, ride them in my opinion, but these things are kind of like pieces of artwork. And I truly think that they are phenomenal machines to own. And if you're not looking at that from the art perspective, but you're looking at them from a second fun toy, or you just want an old British bike to ride around and put some miles on, I think you definitely can. And if you buy the right bike, it's going to treat you right. If you buy a basket case, it's going to treat you not great. But again, they're very simple to work on, so if you do take them apart, blow them apart, rebuild them, do the services to them, make them fresh, and spend, you know, a couple $1,000s refreshing an entire motor and just getting it right, I think it's definitely worth your investment. They ride like nothing else, these motorcycles feel like nothing else, and they have a very unique charm to them. Those 70s Hondas are absolutely phenomenal machines, and I will say that they're a better bike than this in every single way, but they don't provide the same experience. There's nothing quite like a BSA Gold Star. There's nothing quite like a British Twin. Those Yamaha XS650s, they're very similar, but they don't provide the same experience that the British Twins do. They're very unique and they're awesome machines. Now, a couple of quick facts that I want to leave you guys on. You want to make sure that these bikes have their tins. On this side, you usually have a toolbox. You got your dry sump tank here. You want to make sure it has things like that. The horn, the correct carburetor. You want to make sure it's not missing too much, because a lot of that stuff can add up when you do go to buy it. Another thing is the odometers. When you are looking at the odometer, it's very hard to trust the odometer on an old British bike. These things are very easy to take off and put new ones on and change them out and disconnect them and ride them without. And especially when you're talking about a bike like a Gold Star that was a race bike and all of those things, you know, it's very hit or miss on if you want to actually trust that or not. On my Triumph, I do trust that it has around 15,000 miles on it. BSA Gold Star is reading 1971. I don't know how much I necessarily believe that, and I was told that those are original miles, not on the motor, but on the entire bike, which I find to be crazy. But apparently this bike was parked, then it was bought by the person I bought it from and restored. I have no proof of that. You know, I take it with a grain of salt, but I just consider, I bought the bike with like 1,800 something miles on it, so I think I've done about 100 miles on it so far. That's how many miles are on the engine oil, the top end, all that stuff, right? So that doesn't really necessarily mean anything to me, but the reason I don't zero it out is because there's a possibility that's original mileage. On my Ariel Square 4, technically I should have zeroed out the odometer, but that thing also has like 2,000 or 3,000 miles on it. Who really knows what it actually has? I'll also mention that most of these bikes are going to be kickstart only. If not all of them are going to be kickstart only unless they've been swapped. All Gold Stars were kickstart only. Vincent's 1000cc V-Twins were kickstart only. The later Triumphs were kickstart only, and I believe maybe in the very last years of Triumph before they went bankrupt, they might have got electric start. I know Norton in 1975, which was the official bankruptcy year of the company, the Commando did get electric start. They made them until 77, but those were just spare parts. So you got 3 years of Commando with electric start, but 1974, I believe, was still... 1974 was either the first year or the last year of not having it or having it. I think 75 was the one and only year that they actually came with them, but I could be wrong. But all the British companies went bankrupt in the late 70s and early 80s, so that last portion of bikes came with electric start, but most of the other ones will be kickstart only unless they've been converted. Those are some of the things to know before buying a British bike. They're quirky, they're weird, but they're super fun, and they're like nothing else. I absolutely love my Gold Star, and I hope to continue to own more British bikes in the future. If you guys found this video informational at all, do me a huge favor, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. As always, the house tees are live on the Vintage Racing Club website. Help support the channel, help support the brand, get yourself some quality tees. And with that said, I will see you guys in the next video. I think that makes sense for the bike. This Gold Star is reading 1900. I do that all the time, man. I always accidentally touch the horn and scare myself.